Hello everyone and welcome to the 2021 Audi E-Tron 55 Quattro. This is Audi's first all-electric SUV, and even though it's been on sale for a couple years now, it's still worth revisiting and talking about because this is quite a complex vehicle, a fairly interesting one, but it does pave the way of what will be the future electric attitude of Audi vehicles. And we're going to dive in right away to what I think about this vehicle, but we have to first of all thanks Glenmore Audi that allowed me to play around with their demo model for a couple days. Many thanks have to go off to them. So the Audi e-tron Quattro, what you need to know is that there's a 95 kilowatt hour lithium ion battery pack underneath the floor. We have two electric motors, one on each axle. They can produce in total 355 horsepower with 402 pound-feet of torque in the normal mode, and then a selectable boost mode that ups those figures to 414 horsepower and 490 pound-feet. Now, I've been able to test out the e-tron before and a few other electric vehicles in the past as well, and talking about range quickly, when this vehicle first went on sale, I believe it was 319 kilometers that the Canadian government deemed was the range of this vehicle, and for 2021 it has been increased to 357 kilometers. Unfortunately, that does seem to be a fairly repetitive disappointment with these traditional manufacturers, is that with their first electric vehicles, they are quite behind the game when it comes to the forefront of this technology, i.e. Tesla, but that's not really worthy of the conversation of this review today. So with this e-tron, it is very evident that you're in an Audi. It still drives very much like an Audi, and I think having this electrification really helps sell what Audi does best and makes me look forward to the vehicles that they will be releasing in the future. When it comes to the design of the exterior and the interior, it's very obviously an Audi, and unless you're stepping right out of something like a Q8, you're only going to really notice the biggest difference between the traditional Audi design and what this electrification is going to offer. So with the interior, even though the layout and where things are and how things are put together very much feel like an Audi to me, there's all of these little elements of design that are taking advantage of the electric car platform. But just to give the e-tron a little more identity, there's a lot of components that are different designs to what you'd find in any of the other Audi crossovers. So for example, the way that you shift from park, reverse, neutral drive and that boost mode labeled as S is this metal plate underneath the palm rest, and it acts and feels very similar to the shifter in a Q7, Q8, whatever, but it's just a different design that feels quite nice to use. The center console is much bigger than what it is in something like a Q8 because we don't have to worry about the mechanical components of a gearbox and a transmission tunnel. And there is quite an interesting design to this center console because you can see that it's cut open a little bit to give more of an airy feeling of this space. And you've got cup holders that have a little bit of an interesting design to hold on to the cups. And there seems to be a lot more three-dimensional elements in the design of this cabin. So it looks like there's almost a shelf here with this brush piece of metal underneath the e-tron logo. You reach down into the grab handles with this interesting diamond outlay, and the Alcantara, or the suede that's in this vehicle, goes all the way to the very base of the dashboard. Speaking of materials, if you're getting out of an equivalently priced Q8, the e-tron isn't going to match up exactly to that, and I'm sure they've had to do that in constraints of budget. Electric cars are expensive to develop, so they had to cost cut somewhere. So for example, the top of the door cards are soft plastic, and down in the center console there is quite a lot of the scratchy hard plastic, but where you rest your leg is up against this leather padding, where my elbows are leather padded too. And it's not that it looks bad in any way, but it is evident that this is more sort of aligned to what you would expect out of a Q5 rather than a Q8. The E-Tron itself is a mid-size SUV, but it isn't quite as large and quite as practical as a Q8. So for the second row of seating, I would say that I have an equivalent amount of headspace, knee room, foot room, maybe even more foot room, because like I've already mentioned, you don't have a transmission, so there's no hump in between those 3 seats. But the seats don't slide forwards and backwards like they would do in the E-Tron. They do fold flat and they do split 3 ways. You do have a small frunk where really you're only going to house the electric charging cables up there. In the boot space, the real boot space, you do have a space for that underneath the false floor where you'll see a space saver spare wheel. But the trunk of the E-Tron is very wide. Speaking more on the driving feeling of this E-Tron, Audi, as standard, doesn't set up this vehicle to have regenerative braking. You have to use these paddles behind the steering wheel to access that regenerative braking. So I'm just driving along now, I've taken my foot off of the throttle and I'm just slowing down by the friction of the road and the wind and all that kind of stuff. But if I hit this paddle once, you can feel that real negative surge of regenerative braking. And if you go one more hit, it's even more aggressive. But that is something that the user has to select, and if you don't like the feeling of a regenerative braking system, if that feels too alien to you. But there is an omission that I think is quite strange to get rid of, and it's that this electric car doesn't have the creep function that any other automatic internal combustion engine car would have. And I know that's done for the sake of efficiency. So the E-Tron can be a little more difficult in a parking lot where you have to apply your foot on the throttle to get it to move forwards and backwards ever so slightly. So that might take a little bit of getting used to, but otherwise, just like what I said with the cabin, it does largely feel like an Audi. The E-Tron comes standard with the air suspension system, so the ride is just beautiful, and you can change around the height settings when you go from the different drive modes, or just change it manually. The steering is quite light, road isolation is fantastic. Here in the higher end trims, we'll have acoustically laminated glass. You have that little bit of electric whir from the motors and from the battery pack, but it's never any louder than the ticking on the indicators. And the acceleration is fun, but it's not mind-bending. It isn't neck-breaking. It isn't what you would maybe hope out of an electric car or a performance electric car. The feeling does change significantly from the normal mode into the boost mode, so I push back on this to get the S symbol, and if I now put my foot on the throttle, the pickup is definitely more rapid, but still not as exciting as maybe you would hope. But to me, this is a very well integrated idea of what an Audi should be as an electric vehicle. How I see Audi positioning themselves in the market is offering impeccable build quality, refinement, and just making you feel like you've got a lot out of your money in terms of road isolation. And electric vehicles are already pretty good standing as that. You don't have any noise, vibration, and harshness from an internal combustion engine or a gearbox. So this leg up that Audi already has in the way that they build their vehicles is extended even further with their EVs. And that's why I've come to like this E-Tron Quattro. It isn't pushing the needle forward in the electric car spectrum. I don't think it's doing anything radically different or new. But it is a very good example of what Audi can do with their platform. And as things get smaller with their e-tron GT and their Q4 e-tron upcoming vehicles, and just trying to condense this technology, I'm sure they'll make it more efficient, they'll make it cheaper, they'll make it more readily available. So those are my condensed thoughts towards the Audi e-tron. I like the vehicle, I like electric cars, and I think this is a good electric car. But with so many competitors coming into this space now, and so many of them claiming a better range, more efficiency, all of that kind of a thing, I think Audi needs to be a little more on top of their game with their future products if they really want to impress people. If you're a previous Audi owner and you own something like a Q8, but you say, you know what, I'm ready to give the electric vehicle ownership a chance, this is going to be a very, very easy transition for you. So that's been everything from me. Thank you so much again to Glenmore Audi that made this review possible. And thanks to you for watching. If you wouldn't mind liking, commenting, subscribing, all of that wonderful stuff really helps this channel out a lot. Thanks again. Hope to see you on the channel again soon.